Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Tuesday, August 27th, and today I'm sitting down to talk about karma and the nodes of the moon. Now, these two topics are very popular in modern astrology, especially because of the proliferation of an entire new sort of modern field called evolutionary astrology. The basic claim of evolutionary astrology is that an analysis of the nodes of the moon, in some cases Pluto, can give you insight into your past lives as well as your current karmic lessons. So it's kind of like an outline of where you've been and where you're going, and the nodes are used heavily, and sometimes Pluto as well. The Jeffrey Wolf Green, if I'm remembering his name right, Jeffrey Green, there's a wolf in there somewhere. Jeffrey Green is a proponent of the sort of Pluto school, looks at the nodes and Pluto, and was kind of an innovator of his own methods, and said that, I believe he said he received some of them in dreams. And then there's people like Stephen Forrest and Patricia Walsh and many others who more generally would just call themselves evolutionary astrologers and are similarly focus a lot on the nodes of the moon. People like Mark Jones. These are sort of some psychological elements plus some evolutionary elements focusing on the nodes and so forth. And so people regularly ask me, because obviously I practice Hellenistic astrology and other sort of medieval Renaissance astrologies, Indian astrology. So, but I have a lot of familiarity with modern forms of astrology because that's where I, like most people, got started with my studies. So I get people asking questions a lot about the nodes of the moon. Even when people have sessions with me, a reading, they might have assumptions about the nodes of the moon. And so I thought I would take today to just make a short video explaining the nodes of the moon and how to think about them from a more traditional standpoint. I'm going to present to you, I've done this a few times before, but I want to present it today, especially in terms of a particular Sanskrit word that we're going to be looking at. And that word is anadi. The word anadi means basically beginningless. And we need to understand basically the way in which Indian astrologers looked at karma, because so much of the conversation about the nodes of the moon that exists today is derived from Indian astrology. Because in the West, although there is a belief in karma and reincarnation, you do not see that focus from Western Greek, Greco-Roman astrologers. You don't see delineation texts talking about past lives or current karmic lessons. There's nothing like that whatsoever. And so sometimes because of that, people will assume that, like, oh, well, this new form of astrology, this new evolutionary form is more spiritual, or it's more evolved or more advanced or something like that. So I want to try to persuade my viewers today that this is not the case, that ancient astrology is just as deeply spiritual as any form of modern astrology might be. And also that there is a different way of thinking both about past lives, about karma, and about the nodes of the moon that may be helpful for you, at least comparing and contrasting this view. If nothing else, it'll be useful for you if you're a student of these things, if you're interested in these kinds of topics. So I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet today. I don't want to make another hour-long recording today if I can help it. So first of all, what we're going to do is just refresh on what the nodes of the moon are. So the nodes of the moon are the points, astronomical points, at which the moon intersects with the sun's path, the ecliptic. And the moon can do so twice, basically twice every month. The moon is going to cross the path of the sun, either ascending, heading upwards across that path towards the north, or it's going to descend across that path towards the south. And what do we say the north or south means? Basically, the north is up in the sky towards the pole star, the south is down towards the southern horizon. So that's the idea. Now, the moon is, in ancient astrology, both in the East and the West, is associated, among other things, with the realm of fortune. That is the changing world of fluctuating substances, events, and experiences, just the flow of material events. Now, it's important at this point to introduce a key word. That word from Sanskrit is called anadi, and it means beginningless. So according to ancient astrologers, both in the East and the West, there's different ways that the astrologers in the West have of talking about this compared to the word anadi in the East, but it's there. This material world and its cycling, all the different kinds of cyclings of opposites, the expansion and contraction of the universe, of so many universes, the weather, the seasons, the hot and cold, damp and dry, all the qualities that we see in nature, all of the events that we see. The idea is that they have always been circling and cycling without beginning. Plato calls this world, he says, is the time is the moving image of eternity. So what we're seeing in the material world is literally something that has no beginning and no end in any absolute sense. It's just a constant cycle of creation, maintenance, destruction over and over that literally has no beginning. That's very hard for us to think about because we're conditioned by events in time that all seem to have a distinct beginning, middle, and end or something like that. So where does this verse come in? Well, let's talk about one of the famous Puranas from India where Krishna is talking to a student, Uddhava, who is inquiring about the nature of the self, the nature of the soul, and the nature of karma and of this material universe. And Uddhava asks some really important questions. He says, "Oh my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature and the happiness and distress that are born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material enclosure? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then how is he ever bound by material nature? So if we're a spirit soul that's eternal, then how come we're bound up in a body? How come we're bound by matter? You know, why do we have to live in a body and we can't get out of it? And why do we have to die if we're actually spirit souls?" So he then says, Krishna says, "O Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings. O most intelligent Uddhava, the living entity called Jiva is part and parcel of me, but due to ignorance has been suffering in material bondage since time immemorial or without beginning. By knowledge, however, he can be liberated." So this is the way that it's described. Plato describes things very similarly in the allegory of the cave, where people who have been in bondage in this material world, thinking that they're merely matter when they're actually spirit souls, have been here since time immemorial, since without beginning, that this is a state of consciousness, and a state of consciousness in and of itself has no beginning, that this is a state of being that doesn't have anything preceding it. And it's been going on this way, fluctuating this way in the appearance of time, through the appearance of time, timelessly. Again, that's why Plato calls it time, the moving image of eternity. So you have to understand the ancient view of time, the soul, and karma. And both the East and the West have this understanding of it, that our origin here is, there is no origin. There is no starting point, really. Okay, so just imagine that. Try to wrap your head around that. It's very difficult. It's like, it's like someone telling you that you are and have always been a fish in water. It's hard to grasp what that means because we are and have always been a fish in water. So something about the nature of who we are and where we are is such that it makes it very difficult for us to see outside of the box of that setup. So because, let me turn my cell phone off here, because it's very difficult to see beyond the shadows that we're that we're moving in, that we're moving through all the time. Just like in Plato's allegory of the cave, it's very difficult for people chained to even understand that they're chained. So that's the nature of the situation. Okay, so from within that context, the nodes of the moon, back to the nodes of the moon, what do they really represent from within the context of beginningless and potentially never-ending karma? What do they possibly, what could they possibly represent? Well, what they represent is the impulse or inclination to do something here. Like the North Node, for example, in the West is talked about as the impulse towards gain or growth or creative proliferation, right? So just having babies, you know, going towards the object of your desire, eating things, doing things, desiring things. Generally speaking, that's what the North Node represented. For example, I want to read you from two medieval astrologers, Abu Mashar and Al-Kabisi, on the nodes of the moon. But according to the most ancient of the philosophers, the nature of the head of the dragon, that's the North Node, is increasing. Indeed, if it were a lucky planet, it adds to the good. But if there were a malevolent star in it, it adds to the bad. That means increase for good or bad. Then we see the tail. But on the contrary, the tail of the dragon, the South Node, is decreasing what it finds. However, the head is good with a good one, bad with a bad one, but the tail is bad with a good one, good with a bad one. So here we see the inherent nature of decrease. Simple example where the North Node is good with a good one and sort of increases the bad of a bad one if a bad planet is with it. Think of a tumor. You don't want a tumor to grow, right? So a malevolent star or planet with the North Node indicates increased growth and desire for bad, for things that are not good. Whereas if you have a tumor on the South Node, it might mean decrease, because let's say the tumor is Saturn or something like that. Then the South Node of the moon it amplifies the tendency to decrease something, and hence will decrease the bad. So just looking at the nodes sort of from a very basic understanding of beginningless karma, just looking at the universe and our situation in it as beginningless. The karma doesn't have a beginning. The activities, fluctuations, changes, storylines here, the birth and death of solar systems, galaxies, the universe itself, infinite numbers of universes, without beginning. It's just going on and on and on and on, and it has always been this way. Right? You can't grasp infinity. You can't grasp something that doesn't have a starting point. And neither do we don't have a starting point either, but here we are in this realm. And spiritual life begins when we start asking the question, do I have to stay here? Is there something else? Should I be looking for something else or not? You know? And basically, the head and tail of the dragon, the North and South Node of the moon, originally had this meaning of being about the things that direct our path, right? On the North Node, desire, growth, proliferation, gain, for good or bad, because that's the main option that you have in this world, right? I get up today, I have some set of desires, I follow them. South Node of the moon is more like fears and aversions, what I don't want, what do I want to avoid, loss, the fear of loss, right? But there are times in which those exact polarities of experience can be flipped. They're not inherently good or bad. So when someone in modern astrology says your North Node is the lesson, your South, that you're working on now, the South Node is the lesson from the past, not exactly accurate. I would say actually it's a deeply flawed way of looking at the nodes, but I also want to respect that I've received readings from evolutionary astrologers that I've really valued, and I really value the integrity of a lot of my friends who are evolutionary astrologers. Philosophically, I want to have that debate and be like, this is just not a good view. And I would border on, again, with all respect, saying that I think it could even be misinforming people. So I'll let you guys decide on your own. Okay, so let's read what Indian astrologers said. This is from a great book from Ernst Wilhelm called Graha Sutras planets of Vedic astrology, and it comes from one of the older Shastric texts on astrology, and there are many, but comes from one of the older, the Graha Sutras. There is a collection called the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, and it is a collection of teachings from, I believe it's probably about the medieval period or very early medieval period in India. So at any rate, here's what Wilhelm says here, gives us stories about the avatars that are associated with Rahu and Ketu. In the beginning of the creation of this kalpa, cycle of time, there it is, the cycles of time, Brahma, the creator, commanded his son to begin creating. But please tell me where my creations are to live. The earth has been submerged during the great deluge, his son replied. She is now in the nether regions. Only if you can retrieve her will I be able to do as you wish. Brahma thought to himself, Lord, you have commanded me to create, so it is up to you to help me solve this problem. Brahma then thought of the Supreme Lord and became absorbed in meditation. All of a sudden, a tiny boar, Varaha, jumped out of his nostril and began to grow and grow until it had assumed immense proportions. All of those who were watching realized that the Supreme Lord had donned the form of a boar in order to raise the earth from below. So basically, the story goes on, and the Vishnu, incarnated now as a boar, lifts the earth out of the flood, out of the waters. And from that point forward, life on earth can be created. The physical plane of life can come into being. And so Rahu indicates the direction of desire in immaterial creation, right? And of course, that desire is ultimately directed by divinity itself. So we can learn a great deal by understanding our desires. Our desires are like curriculums. I'm not going to disagree with that take on the North Node. Yes, it's your curriculum, but it's also your desires. And we know very well that having desires in this material world is something created specifically for the purpose of allowing beings with free will to explore what it means to be in aversion to being with divinity. So this entire world is thought of in the ancient scriptures, whether it's Plato's cave or whether we're looking at the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras, etc. This material world is looked at as a kind of matrix of exploring our desires to do or be something other than in union with our higher self. And we have been here without beginning. This is the nature of our setup. This is the nature of who and what we are. We're a type of being, and this realm is a type of realm where this kind of stuff is happening. And so the desires that we have that propel our path are always teachers. They're always representing an opportunity for us to connect with our source, with our higher self. But desires are problematic because, as Wilhelm goes on to say, Rahu is what perpetuates reincarnation, because we have some sense of unresolved desires and, choose your own adventures that we want to go on. And that's allowed, right? That's allowed. In fact, it's never not been allowed. In fact, that's always what we've been doing. Okay. So then flip over to the avatar of Ketu, the south node. At the end of the previous kalpa, Brahma, the creator, went to sleep and the world became submerged under the waters. When Brahma was sleeping, an asura, that's a demon, stole the Vedas from him and disappeared under the waters. Previous to this event of the world becoming submerged under the waters, a saintly king by name of Satyavrata ruled the world. One day, Satyavrata was performing his ablutions on the banks of the river Kritamala. When he took up the water in his cup palm, he found a tiny fish in his hands. He promptly dropped the fish back in the water. The fish spoke and said, "O king, have pity on me. I am so small and afraid of the big fish which threaten to eat me up. Please take me away and protect me." The king was touched by the fish and took it home and placed it in a suitable vessel filled with water. The next morning the fish said, "There is not enough space. Please place me in a wider pot." Sure enough, the fish had outgrown his new home overnight. Satyavrata wondered at this and placed the fish in a much wider pot. But within an hour, the fish had outgrown the new pot. Satyavrata then placed it in a pond. And the same thing happened. He kept placing the fish in larger and larger ponds and lakes, but the fish kept growing and complaining that it did not have enough space. Finally, Satyavrata took it to the ocean and dropped it there. The fish said, "The ocean is full of sharks and whales, which will surely eat me up. Why did you bring me here?" Satyavrata smiled and said, "You are no ordinary fish. I know who you are. You are the Supreme Lord who has donned this form for some good purpose." The Lord in the form of the fish then said, "You are right. 7 days from today, the 3 worlds will be submerged under the waters. The great deluge is coming. When the world goes completely under, you will see a boat. Take your place in the boat with the 7 rishis. I will be in the waters. When you see me, tie the boat firmly to me. I will play on the waters for the duration of Brahma's night, the period during which Brahma is sleeping and creation is submerged, and you will be safely with me." All happened as was said. The deluge came, the worlds were submerged, and the 7 rishis, along with Satyavrata, sailed away under the power of Mina. During the deluge, Mina fought an asura who had stolen the Vedas, which he returned to Brahma at the end of the great deluge, who would need them in order to create the worlds properly. The Lord in the form of the fish also taught self-realization to Satyavrata. So there you have it. Mina was a fish who was discontented with all smaller vessels except for the ocean of spirit. This is very important because the South Node is connected in this story to the destruction of the physical universe. It is described as the story that matches with it is about a fish who comes into our lives and who takes up a little space. Well, the first time you go to a yoga class, the first time you meditate, first time you take in anything that's kind of healthy for you, it's a little drop dose. In time, that little drop dose of divinity needs more space. I need more time for my highest self. I need more time for wellness. I need more time for peace. I need more time for love. And that demand of spirit, which is your actual true nature, starts to grow. And the sort of Lord in your heart, that fish, almost like Pisces, right? That fish grows and it needs more and it needs more and it needs more. And suddenly this whole world is not big enough for it. The material world is no longer a satisfactory place in which to hold your true self, your spirit. And so eventually this is a reality that is what annihilates the material universe as it goes into the phase of slumber from which it eventually emerges. And remember, this cycle has no actual beginning. This cycle is perpetual, and it has always been that way. And we can't think about that because we are bound by time. That is part and parcel of our natures, that our minds are bound by time. Plato says the same thing again. Time is the moving image of eternity. So it's only by reflecting on time and beginning to see the co-presence of the past, present, and future in all things that we start to come to the realization of a different kind of consciousness. All right. So the next thing that typically happens is, once you're reading and you're studying about this, you're kind of like, okay, so how do I use the nodes, right? Because this is deep stuff. So here's the simple way of how to use the nodes. You look at the nodes of the moon and you look at the South Node, and the South Node is the place in your life that is going to be a vessel and a container for spirit. It is the fish that is going to grow and demand and demand and demand more of your letting go of material desires and attachments and starting to develop some desire for moksha, liberation, freedom from material bondage. And wisdom comes in through the South Node. However, the South Node delivers that desire as it diminishes our attachments and our desires for things in the material world, which often occurs through loss. It often occurs through diminution, and it often occurs through the suffering that we endure as we're letting go of things. If you don't believe me, have you ever tried to withdraw from caffeine, sugar, nicotine, alcohol, a relationship, right? The same thing happens. As you're letting go of that relationship, it hurts. It's painful. You don't want to let go of it. But then as you're letting go of it, the pain has a way of purifying. And the pain makes you say, I don't ever want to be that attached again because, gosh, I'm feeling so free now. Put that on the scale of coming to understand that our nature has been about being in these relationships with material plots and stuff without beginning. So when we come to realize that we want something different, that fish, that little spirit grows and grows and grows. It comes through loss. It comes through letting go. It comes through surrender. That's all South Node stuff. Now, this is how the Indian astrologers are looking at the South Node, Ketu, the deliverer of moksha, of liberation from the material world, from the cave that Plato talks about. So then we go to the North Node, and the North Node, on the other hand, is going to represent the things that you're going to desire that will keep you more or less, keep the cycle going, keep the circle going. They're going to emphasize, the North Node is going to emphasize the way that your world is going to be created, the way that your entanglements, your desires, your attachments, the way it's going to proliferate and grow. They can be your teacher. Remember, behind Rahu is still an avatar of Vishnu, right? There's still, if you want to translate it into Christian terms, Christ is still in the North Node, or whatever avatar or spiritual personality that is a bestower of blessings and insight and growth. Yeah, it's all there in the North Node, but it's going to come through the study of your desires and mostly the kind of stomachache they give you, so to speak. They're all good for a while, right? But they also come with this stomachache, this of learning, right? So I desire wealth, I desire fame, or I desire a family or a nice job or this or that. And then you get the thing, and then you come to realize it wasn't what you thought, right? And that's happened. Think about this. This has been happening without a beginning. So now, why do I believe that this is important to teach us about? The first reason is very simple, because when we look at the South Node as the bad stuff from the past, or the lessons we've learned, or the wisdom we've gained, and then the North Node as the future that we're going towards, we're playing into a linear view of time. And this linear view of time typically comes along with a very subtle, but in my opinion, pervasive kind of Christian theology that involves a fall. At one point long ago, I was okay, right? But then in time, I chose to do something bad. I fell from grace. I walked out of Eden. I quit. I ate the fruit, whatever. But we think about this as a literal moment in time. And then we think about ourselves as having to progress through some kind of salvatory experience. We're walking towards salvation through a series of tests and learning journeys and adventures. And this is why the word journey, I'm on a journey, is so popular in some ways, I think, because we look at our life in terms of a progression of, well, I'm getting better, well, I'm getting better, well, I'm getting better. But the problem with this that it can create on a subtle level is that if we haven't grasped the idea that there's no beginning to this is just who we are, then our sense of where we've been can be punitive and guilt-ridden, and our sense of where we are going can also be punitive and guilt-ridden. It can be about look at how bad I am, look at how much progress I've made, which is it's kind of a Protestant work ethic. It's kind of a Christian consumerist, forward moving, like I started with nothing, but I'm gonna evolve and enlighten up, and all I got to do is work on not being dependent in this lifetime financially, but independent. I got to work less on putting myself into others and become more of myself, or vice versa. There's basically 6 to 12 oscillating karmas with the nodal axis that we talk about in modern evolutionary astrology, which is incredibly myopic. So it doesn't get any better by just looking at the ruling planets or their placements or anything like that either, because the reason it's myopic and the reason that we're not really getting it with this paradigm, in my opinion, is because we haven't grasped the word anadi that Indian philosophers used, that Plato himself used in a different way, but as one of the main instigators of the philosophy of astrology. Beginningless. This is just who we are. This is what we've been doing. There is no mention in ancient texts of the importance of like really nailing down your past lives so that you can really figure something out now. None of that exists. And I'll tell you why. Because there are literally an infinite number of lives that we've lived. There is no end to the amount of time that we've spent here doing different things in different bodies and different stories. There is no old soul here. There's nothing like that, right? This is from the standpoint of the yogic shastras, and at least from the Indian perspective, we can't look at the soul and say, well, if I only understand what I got wrong before and what I have to do now, then I'll make some progress. This kind of thinking is delusional. So we have to come up with a new way of holding what the evolutionary paradigm of the nodes is really pointing to. What it's really pointing to is this: any kind of desire that you've had now, that you have now, that you will have in the future, and any kind of desire that you've had in the past is natural and endogenous to this realm. And it never ends. It never has, and it never will. So you can go on doing things in this world, and it's a pretty magical and complicated place. But the one problem with this place is that whatever you desire, it results in loss eventually. And whatever loss you have, that's also temporary in a material sense. However, you are a spirit soul, and you also can participate in other realms and other states of consciousness, aside from being identified with these cycles of material creation, birth, destruction, etc. So if we take the mystical journey of ancient astrology seriously, then what we're looking at with the nodes is really just a picture of the samskaras, the patterns of the soul in this lifetime. It's an outline. It's just a sketch of them saying this direction. That's where the desires will take you. That's where they'll unfold. If you're a spiritual person, if you're any kind of person, you're going to have them. And you can't, so you can learn from them, and you can try to not let them override your sanity. Because Rahu is thought of as something that can actually threaten a person's sanity. That's how desire works. Just look at the world. It's insane because we're driven by our desires in many ways. On the other hand, the south node of the moon, Ketu, points to, hey, if you let spirit in, which often comes when we experience loss, deflation, disillusionment, realizing that something we wanted isn't that great, that's south node stuff. When we allow that to awaken spirit, the demands of spirit grow. Our heart opens, our mind opens. We start associating with and looking for spiritual people, spiritual teachers, spiritual wisdom, a spiritual path, because eventually that spirit outgrows the material container. And then so many different traditions, so many different processes of enlightenment, moksha, union, whatever so I'm not going to tell you that I know the answers to all of that, but I can tell you as someone who is spiritually aspiring, as someone who is, keeps a spiritual practice regularly and is working on looking for a version of self and happiness that is not based on all of my desires, disappointments, right? And that's hard. I'm not any expert on it in terms of having realized it, but I'm trying, right? And I think probably a lot of people watching this channel, a lot of people who like astrology, are also trying on some level. So the thing that we need to be careful of is that there's no offense to anybody who's into past lives, past life regressions, any of that, but there is no need to investigate the past because it's without beginning. And that doesn't mean it couldn't benefit you as well. There's just no need. It's not as if you need to get to the root of what some old problem was that you had, right? It's beginningless. This is just who we are. This is just what we are. And it just so happens if we want, we can do something else. So that something else that we can do is also not dependent upon us passing a test or getting an A on the lessons of our North Node in this lifetime. So a different way of thinking about it. Instead, you can think about your north node and all that as representative again of the desires you have and the lessons you might learn or be learning based on the desires you have. And be careful, because that north node is exactly what is thought to perpetuate reincarnation. The south node of the moon is, might be more difficult, more challenging, more losses, difficult experiences. But those experiences may open you up to the truth of this material nature that we're in. Those experiences, like when you lose someone you love, again, what can it do? Everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts. With that insight, we start to ask the question, is there anything else that I could do? To ask that question, is there anything else I can do? It is so hard for us to imagine that to ask that question, we don't have to look at the world and condemn it. We can't, it's not about condemnation. It's not about saying, oh, the world sucks, or about saying, well, we sucked in the past up until now. It's just about recognizing this is what it is, and I'm just wondering if there's something different. Because I'm finding that something is growing in me, and there may not be room for it here in this world. We don't blame we don't blame and scold and guilt children for growing out of themselves, right? So there is an evolution that's taking place, but that evolution is not based on a stained past, and it's not based on needing to get something right in the future in any material sense. And no matter what people say about the idea that your north node is your lesson, it's just not backed up by any of the Vedic scriptures. It's not backed up by the actual definition of the nodes themselves, right? Anything can be a lesson. Anything in this world, a grain of sand to the biggest moral dilemma of your life, can propel you on the spiritual path. So this idea that we should give a lot of weight to the north node in terms of what we're here to learn and do and study and a grade we're supposed to make and all of that, it's not at all. I don't believe it's a healthy way of thinking about it. So I encourage everyone to spend time with this concept of that which is without beginning. And I want to read the verses one more time. Oops, here we go. So this is, again, Uddhava asking Krishna. O my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature and the happiness and distress that are born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material enclosure? In other words, how is it possible he could ever get out of this? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then how does he ever get to be in material nature in the first place? So in other words, he's asking, how is it that we're not totally bound here, that we could get out? And how is it that if we can get out, that we ever got here? Right? Krishna's answer, O most intelligent Uddhava. He's recognizing this is a sign of intelligence that you're looking at this. The living entity called Jiva is part and parcel of me, like a spark is to a fire or the ray of sun is to the sun. It emanates from, is dependent upon its source, but is a part of it at the same time. Part and parcel of me, but due to ignorance meaning just that we don't know, he has been suffering in material bondage since time immemorial, the word anadi being used, beginningless. By knowledge, however, he can be liberated. So I hope that this has been useful for you. I'm giving you this as yesterday, as the moon passed through the eclipse points, I received several questions about the nodes of the moon and karma, and so I thought I'd make this video diving into it in a little greater depth and detail. I have no idea if I made my goal was for half an hour, and I think I totally botched that. So sorry, I'm making you all suffer through this. I hope that by suffering through this, the fish is growing bigger and soon will outgrow its current pot. All right, that's what I've got for you guys. Take care. Bye.